Good afternoon. I'm aware from your comments and private messages that many of you have seen a new video that appeared on YouTube a couple of days ago claiming to be telling the facts about the Luke Mitchell-Jodi Jones case. There was a comment under the video itself that said, it gives a good timeline of what took place, also sticks to the facts, and that's rare with this case. Okay, so I thought I'd take a look at it and see if it lives up to that claim. I am not going to address all the stuff that's been addressed a million times before. I will get accused of cherry picking, so be it. It's tedious to keep having to answer the same things. Anyway, there are some bits in this video that I thought were really interesting. So I've decided to have a look at them. Leave the rest because we've dealt with it a million times before. But just these new bits. Now remember, they're claiming these are the facts. So let's have a look at the first clip. This is just about 2 minutes in, so right from the very beginning. Have a listen.
The jury would hear that on the day of the 30th, Judith gathered Jodi and her siblings Janine and Joseph to make them aware she would be attending her late husband Jimmy's grave less, perhaps a further step in her progress of grief.
Judith gathered Jodi and her siblings Janine and Joseph. Well, according to all the other evidence, Janine was nowhere near her mother's house that day. She couldn't have been, because she had to be with Stephen Kelly, providing his alibi. So which was it? Was she in her mother's house or was she not? And Judith gathered them to tell him she was going to be visiting her husband Jimmy's grave less. And what did she do that very afternoon? Visited her late husband Jimmy's grave. Okay.
The family listened to a song by Jimmy's favourite artist Rod Stewart before Judith advised Jodi, although she had been previously grounded, she would let her out to see her friends.
Okay, again, the family listened to the Rod Stewart track, including Janine, who apparently wasn't there. Now remember, Alan Ovens mistook Janine for Joseph at one point, saying at first he thought Janine was there and then saying it wasn't Janine, it was Joseph. So this first part appears to be claiming that Janine was in her mother's house on the afternoon of the 30th of June. And yet they all said she was nowhere near because she was with Stephen Kelly all day.
Jodi and Luke often met on Ronsdyke Path.
No, they didn't. Very occasionally, they met at the top end of the path where the big break in the wall goes all the way down, and went in that little bit at the top there for a smoke, which is what a lot of the kids from New Battle High School did. But there's actually no evidence that they met regularly anywhere on the path. And we have the evidence that says that was not the case. But we shall continue with these facts.
Jodi's mother, Judith, had instructed both of them that Jodi was not to walk the path alone. Indeed, Jodi's schoolmate, Rachel Quinn, while giving evidence, stated that Jodi had made her aware Luke was to meet her at the east end of the path, by Jodi's house, or halfway along Ronsdyke itself, at minimum.
The evidence at trial demonstrated that Judith knew perfectly well that Jodi used the path on her own, and not just Judith, because in their evidence, Janine confirmed that her mother knew Jodi used the path on her own, and Alice Walker's evidence was that was the path Jodi would have used to get to Luke's. No mention of Luke coming up to meet her. Now this friend that says Jodi had made her aware, we've nothing to corroborate that because sadly Jodi's dead. But what would have been the point of Luke meeting Jodi halfway? The biggest danger to her would have been the entrance to the path itself. Remember, the new houses weren't there at the time. That was just wasteland. So the entrance to the path itself, and then the big break in the wall at the top of the path, if somebody had been hiding in there that maybe wanted just that. What would have been the point of meeting her halfway? And of course, Jodi's phone was broken. So how would Luke know what time to leave in order to meet her halfway? Now think about this. They'd made an arrangement to meet at some point with no times. So how was he to know what time he had to be there to meet her halfway? It makes no sense.
On the face of it, this wouldn't have appeared to be an issue, as Jodi had advised her mum that her and Luke would be, quote, mucking about up here, meaning she intended to stay close to the family home.
Okay, that's not factually accurate. Jodi did not tell her mum that her and Luke would be mucking about up here, staying close to the family home. According to Jodi said she would be mucking about up here, and Jodi presumed she would be with Luke. We're talking facts.
Rena Bryson gave evidence that around 4:54 she saw a male and a female at the east end of the path. The female with dark hair, wearing it in a ponytail, with dark navy blue hoodie and similar coloured trousers. The male, with long, messy, sandy brown hair, was wearing a large green parka-style jacket with the collar up. Police used Bryson's shop receipts to place her on the road at that time also.
Okay, let's take this a little bit at a time. First of all, the descriptions. Andrina Bryson never said anything about a parka-style jacket, ever. So that's the first thing. Secondly, as they're describing this male with long, messy, sandy brown hair, they've got a picture of Luke with his longer hair on the screen. What they failed to mention was that she also said it was sticking up, it was thick and sticking up in a clump at the back. And then they go on to show a parka-style jacket that fits with their description that they've just given, that Andrina Bryson never gave. And finally, they say the police used the shop receipt to place her on the road at that time. No, they didn't, because if they'd used the shop receipt, she would have been too late to fit the timing that they needed that sighting to happen. So they didn't. They used the bank details, not the shop receipt.
Two local youths known to the family also testified to being in the area where Jodi's body was found between 5 o'clock and 5:15, although they would further state that they did not see Luke or Jodi.
Now remember, the claims are that this gives a good timeline. 5 o'clock to 5:15, moped boys. Remember that time. I'm coming back to it.
John Ferris and Gordon Dickey admitted to driving up and down the path on a moped, but both stated they did not go over the wall, with no evidence to show the statement was untrue.
Uh-oh. But did not go over the wall, and there was no evidence that this statement was untrue. There is now. And they drove up and down the path. Remember that as well. 5 o'clock to 5:15, they're driving up and down the path on the moped.
A further witness, cyclist Leonard Kelly, gave evidence that he was on the path around 5:15, and further commented he had been startled by a strangling noise, saying it had sounded like someone had someone in a headlock. Mr. Kelly said that he did not investigate as it went quiet, and he also testified that he could hear the moped being used by Ferris and Dickey, stating it sounded like it was some distance away at the time.
Okay, this is interesting. So, Mr. Kelly, this is Leonard Kelly, not Stephen Kelly, Mr. Kelly stated that he heard the moped being used by Ferris and Dickey. How did he know? How did he know whose moped it was? Secondly, he said it was some distance away. Now we know the path itself is only about 800, 900 metres, something like that. Ferris and Dickey claim they are driving up and down the path and he's cycling up the path. But now they're some distance away at the same time.
At 5:40, Mitchell made a call and spoke to Judith's partner, Alan Evans. Mr. Evans made him aware Jodi had left to meet him already.
Mr. Evans made him aware that Jodi had left. Not left to meet him, left. Mr. Evans may actually have said they've already left.
After this call, Luke would not attempt to contact Jodi again, and when questioned later, stated he could not remember if he had tried to confirm whether they were still meeting up.
Now this is a trick that's used a lot. It's take a nugget of truth and embed it in a story so that it sounds plausible, but it's not actually true. So when they were questioning Luke, he was asked, did you contact Jodi? Did you speak to Jodi that evening? And he said, no, I don't think so. And then he goes, wait, no, I did. I phoned the house. It was her mum's partner that answered. Now this is in the same couple of minutes of questioning. So initially, when they asked him, did you speak to Jodi? Did you contact Jodi after the series of texts? He says, no, I don't think so. And then almost immediately goes, no, wait, I did. I called the house. So forgot. It makes it sound like he was trying to cover something up. He forgot momentarily.
A little after the time of the call, another witness, Lorraine Fleming, testifies she also spotted Mitchell leaning against the gate at the end of the west end of the path around 5:50. Miss Fleming says she felt he was acting suspiciously as he kept his head down and commented to the driver of the car she was in that, quote, he looks like he's been up to no good.
Well, the he looks like he's been up to no good comment appeared in court, and both she and Rosemary Walsh, her sister-in-law, the driver of the car, used that phrase, which led Donald Finlay to point out that they had never used that phrase before, and yet both of them had used it on the stand, suggesting they had discussed their evidence before giving it at trial. And note the time here, 5:50. Now we're going to be watching these times all the way through because the claim is that this is a good timeline.
Between 5 to 10 minutes later, Luke was again seen by a driveway close to his house in New Battle Abbey Crescent. Andrew Holborn, unsure who Luke was informed by his friends Dean Houston and Grant Elliott. Houston himself would sometimes cycle to school with Mitchell. Grant Elliott would also further testify that Luke was still standing in the same spot when he made his return journey home around 20 to 30 minutes later.
Okay, a few things to unpack here. Let's start with Luke was seen by a driveway near his home. Again, a little bit disingenuous. He was actually sitting on a wall at the end of his street, which is near a driveway that at one point he said he walked up to look up the road to see if he could see Jodi coming. He was smoking. So he stood just inside this driveway smoking a cigarette to see if he could see Jodi coming. So seen near a driveway. Well, yeah, because it was near the wall that he was sitting on. Now these three boys, 5 to 10 minutes later. So we've got the 5:50 sighting, and then we've got 5 to 10 minutes later. So it's 5:55 to 6 o'clock. These boys see him sitting on the wall. And then the other boy, on his way back, because he got a puncture, sees Luke sitting there 20 to 30 minutes later. So we're somewhere between 20 past 6 and 6:30 now. And Luke's still in the same place.
Indeed, Carol Heatle would state that she witnessed Luke in this driveway, testifying she slowed down to see what he was up to, as he seemed to have tried to step out of her way when he spotted the car. This around 5 minutes past 6.
This witness did say she saw somebody who could have been Luke standing in a driveway at exactly the time Luke said he was standing in the entrance to Barrendale Cottages, looking up the road to see if Jodi was coming. But I need to point out that where it says in the video he was standing in this driveway with the picture, it's not that driveway. It's important to make that distinction. It's not that driveway. Okay, so Carol Heatley saw Luke, what she thought was Luke, standing just inside this driveway at 6:05. Exactly the place where he said he stood looking up to see if Jodi was coming down. So there's actually nothing particularly suspicious about this, but what it does is it gives us a timeline that goes 10 to 6, 5 to 6, 6 o'clock, 6:05, and then somewhere between 6:20 and 6:30. So there's not a great deal of time missing there, and he's in the same place.
Corinne would state that she returned straight home from work at 5:15. Luke at the time, again making dinner, asked if some of the veg could be edible, and Corinne made a comment to the court that she hadn't been to the shop, so they had very little in the house.
Watch for the trickery coming. What Corinne actually said was she hadn't been for the weekly shop, which she did on a Tuesday, her day off work. So by Monday, they would have been running low because she did her weekly shop on a Tuesday, but watch for the trick coming up.
Luke would leave the house at 6:20. The same time, Mitchell would call Jodi's house and be informed she had already left. The previous call that he had forgot he'd made when questioned.
So he must be calling Judy's house as he's leaving his mother's house, because they're both happening at 6:20, so they must have been happening at the same time. And again, this reiteration of the previous call he'd forgotten he'd made. Already explained that momentarily, and then corrected it immediately.
Mitchell would go on to claim during questioning he would wait for Jodi at the west end of Rowansdyke, but would not step foot on the path itself. He would instead wait there until 6:32, where he would contact his friends David High, ironically arranging to meet and smoke cannabis. The boys would meet up at 7 p.m. at Newbattle Abbey College with another youth, David Tulloch.
So again, watch the timings here. 6:32. He's left the house at 6:20. He's been seen hanging about. So a couple of minutes after the latest possible sighting by the boy on the pushbike, he calls David High at 6:32. I don't know what's ironic about the fact that they're meeting to smoke cannabis. That was just the fact of the matter, but throw the word in there.
At 10 p.m, the time of Jodi's curfew, she hadn't returned, meaning her mum Judith texted Luke's phone asking her to come home and informing her that she would again be grounded for being late.
Oh dear. So the picture of the phone with the text says 10:20. Well, she didn't text Luke until 10:38 to say that Jodi was to get up the road, not 10:20. The other thing is, the text did not say that Jodi was grounded again. Now, you'd have expected it would have, since she'd only just been apparently ungrounded, but it did not say she was grounded again. Now, watch what they do with this picture of the phone with the 10:20 time on it.
At 10:43, Luke would call back to say he hadn't seen Jodi all day.
It makes it look like Luke waited 23 minutes to respond to that text. And it's not true, because the text didn't come in until 10:38. And Luke called Judith immediately. The first call didn't connect. I had to call a second time. But he called back immediately. And we have the phone records. We have that text with the time. So we know it wasn't 10:20. The other claim here that Luke said he hadn't seen Jodi all day. Don't be ridiculous. He was with her in school. He was with her at lunchtime. He made no secret of that. He hadn't seen her all evening. Not all day.
Judith would testify that after hanging up, she felt something was wrong. She then called Luke back to confirm he wasn't covering for her, before calling her mother Alice, as well as the police and Jodi's friends.
Nope, she didn't call Luke back to check whether he was covering for Jodi. That's absolutely not what happened. We have the phone records. So Luke called Judy to say he hadn't seen Jodi. Judy then called her mother before calling Luke back at 10:49. And when she called Luke back at 10:49, it was to say she'd called Jodi's friends and she was calling the police. But the phone records also show that she hadn't called Jodi's friends. And she hadn't yet called the police either.
Judith made 4 more calls to Luke between 10:49 and 11:17, who advised he was on Rowansdyke Path with his dog Mia, looking for Jodi.
More trickery. So 4 calls between 10:49 and 11:17, making it look like she was in constant communication with Luke up till 11:17. That's not what happened. 10:49, she called back and he said he would go up Roansdyke Path and up to our mum's house if he didn't find Jodi on the way. 10:59, 1 minute to 11, was the last time their calls connected. And that was when he told her he was at the entrance, the New Battle entrance to the path. There was no further communication. The 10:17 call, I know, was not answered, and I can't remember off the top of my head what other call there might have been in between. I do know it wasn't answered, if indeed there is one, because the last communication between them was 10:59, just as Luke was going up the path.
Jodi's big sister Janine, her fiancé Stephen Kelly, and Gran Alice Walker set off from their home in Mayfield after being contacted by Judith, looking to search the path also.
Wait, why? Why were they looking to search the path also, when, by Judith's own admission, Jodi had said she was going to be mucking about up here close to home? Now, we now know that both Alice and Janine have said in evidence they weren't looking anywhere else. They were not looking anywhere, including up here where Jodi was supposed to be. Their only point of interest that night was the path itself. Why?
They met Luke with his dog, and Luke, already having searched up to that point, agreed to search the area again with the group. This time, however, Luke would climb over the wall separating the path and woodland area, claiming his dog Mia had jumped up at the wall a couple of feet after the gap he used to access the woods. The rest of the search party would testify, however, that Luke did not pass the gap at all. The court heard that Luke instead handed his dog's lead to Alice Walker and scaled the wall as soon as he reached the gap.
And of course we now know that that's not what they said in their original statements, but that was changed for their testimony. So it's what they said in court, but it's not what they said in their statements.
These wounds, believed to have been received while Jodi was kneeling due to the blood spray on the wall.
Okay, let's be absolutely clear about this. That is not a crime scene picture. That is not a picture from the wall, from Roansdyke wall. There is much, much more blood in that picture than there is in the crime scene photographs, and even that picture does not depict the type of blood spray you would expect from the cutthroat injuries that Jodi suffered, and the claim that she's kneeling facing the wall is what caused that blood spray. So again, a little bit trickery. They've used a picture that's nothing to do with the crime scene to try and match it with the claims, and that's not what the blood on the wall looked like.
Experts testify these injuries were caused by a stout, sharp knife, and when shown a folding knife, agreed it would match the suspected weapon.
No. The pathologist said it was possible that the knife he was shown could have inflicted some of the injuries, but that it was too short to have inflicted some of the others, and demonstrated that it would have to be held by the very tip of the handle, and that a knife that length inflicting the injuries to Jodi's tonsil would have damaged the knuckles on the perpetrator's hands and also Jodi's teeth. There were no such injuries on Luke and no such damage to Jodi's teeth. So he didn't agree that it matched.
Jodi would also suffer injuries to the head, although there was no clarity as to what may have caused this, or if they were used to help incapacitate her or carried out post-mortem.
If they're talking about the blow to the back of Jodi's head, it was not inflicted post-mortem. Was it used to incapacitate her? Probably, or at least that's what it was intended to do. But we know unconscious people don't kneel or sit of their own volition. And if the attacker had to hold Jodi in that position whilst cutting her throat, it's absolutely inconceivable that they would have had no blood on them. The other thing is, the pathologist was quite clear. Jodi fought to the end. Well, unconscious people don't fight.
After the discovery of Jodi's body, members of the search party had their belongings taken for forensic testing, while Luke was taken to Dalkeith police station for questioning.
Note that he says their belongings. Not their clothing, not their phones, belongings. We know that they took Stephen Kelly's shoes, because he took him to his dad's house to get another pair of shoes, so that they could take the ones he was wearing. But they did not take their clothes, and we have the statements and we have all the evidence. We have the evidence that it was 5 days later before they started gathering their clothes. And Mr. Dobby himself admitted on the stand that it was several days before they started to gather their clothes. Oh yeah, and Luke was taken to Dalkeith for questioning. Now you could just let that one go until you say why. Why was only Luke taken to Dalkeith for questioning? There were 4 of them there. 3 of them had been over the wall. And he wasn't taken to Dalkeith just for questioning, was he? We know that now. He was stripped, he was swabbed, he was photographed. They took DNA from him. So it was not just questioning. But nobody stops to say, but why? Why was he the only one? And here again, they present it as if it's just the most normal thing in the world. So they took Luke for questioning. What about the others?
The court would hear that around 12:30 a.m, Luke would delete information from his phone, such as texts and call data.
Luke would delete details from his phone, such as calls and text data. How? His phone was in the possession of the police by 12:30. And the expert said the data had been erased during the police examination of the phone. So nothing to do with Luke.
The Mitchells' home would be searched on the 4th of July. PC Anita Dow described Mitchell's bedroom as being in a state of, quote, disgusting, smelly squalor. Luke appeared to be sleeping on the floor. With his bed cluttered, police found cannabis, scales, a multi-tool, along with a receipt for a skunting knife and an empty knife pouch. Police would also find 20 bottles of Mitchell's own urine hidden within drawers, under his bed, and some wrapped in his own clothes.
Okay, we're going to take this a bit at a time. First of all, the impression given here is that all of that stuff was found on the 4th of July, the first raid. It wasn't. It wasn't. The receipt for the knife wasn't found, it didn't even exist until the December, 6 months later. So the best we can say here is they must have had psychic powers. The urine, now, first of all, that was not found in the July 4th raid, and we have the psychologist report that says this developed as a trauma response to everything that had happened. So it was first discovered just prior to the 14th of August raid. But the FLO, the family liaison officer, claimed that she was never alone with Luke, because anything that she gathered or collected while she was alone with Luke, that would have been entrapment. So it was claimed that she was always alibied. She went into Luke's room with him alone and asked about some videos and some bottles. And that was where she discovered the urine in the bottles and reported it back. So again, that was trickery, and the use of the bottles of urine was used to make Luke appear to be weird, even though we have a psychological explanation for it. The use of the picture of the guy retching at how disgusting this collecting of urine is. Yeah, mock a mental health condition. Because that's what it was. The other thing that you have to ask is, what on earth does that have to do with murder? He collected urine in his room for whatever reason. Yeah, it's not exactly hygienic, but it does nothing to prove that he was capable of murder or that he carried out a murder, does it? It's not evidence of anything other than, and the psychological report made it clear, a trauma response.
DNA from Luke and Stephen Kelly was found at the scene. Kelly's on a t-shirt Jodi had been wearing, believed to have been borrowed from her sister Janine. Stephen would also have a confirmed alibi for that night Jodi was murdered.
Hang on. You notice they believed to have belonged to Janine because it was never proven to belong to Janine. And Stephen was found to have a proven alibi. Well, they just said at the beginning that Janine wasn't with him when she said she was. What happened to his proven alibi?
Luke's only a partial match could not be used as evidence of murder, as it was accepted that the two were in a sexual relationship, and this would be expected. DNA also itself being considered circumstantial evidence under Scottish law. It would instead be up to the prosecution to prove through forensic evidence, placing him at the scene during the time, should they want to rely on the DNA route.
Where do I begin with this one? The claim that they weren't going to try and use DNA because they were in a relationship, and therefore they would have to prove that the DNA proved that he was there at the time of the murder. That little bit at the end is an add-on. Up until now, they just claimed that there was an agreement that they weren't going to use it because they were in a relationship. If that were the case, then why did the prosecution raise the partial DNA sample on Jodi's bra, trying to claim that Luke couldn't be eliminated from it? Why did they raise the DNA on the pair of trousers and a holdall that had been at Luke's dad's from one of the weekends he'd stayed there, to try and link Jodi's DNA to Luke? If that was the agreement, that they couldn't use it because they were in a relationship, why did they use it? Because they did.
Such witness, a teacher at Mitchell's High School, stating he looked like a, quote, hooded monk. Further photographs showing Luke wearing a Parker-style jacket at a concert weeks before Jodi died, and CCTV footage from inside the school itself showing Luke wearing the jacket showed this to be untrue.
Here we have some new evidence about the Parker jacket. It's only taken 20 years, but let's take it a bit at a time. The hooded monk teacher, now that was about at the time, the teacher who said he looked like a hooded monk. But we were led to believe there was only one youth who had a Parker jacket, or that was their claim. And that's why he was so noticeable. And then we find out during the destruction of the evidence that there's another youth and another Parker jacket. So it's entirely possible that this lad that looked like a hooded monk wasn't Luke at all, but this other lad that they knew had a Parker jacket, and they came and took it. The picture of Luke at a concert in a Parker-style jacket. Okay, so not a Parker then. How many different styles of jackets ended up being described as Parker-style just to fit this narrative? And I'm going to finish with the CCTV footage from the school. Yep, they almost certainly do have CCTV footage from the school of Luke in a Parker jacket. There are actually pictures of him all over mainstream media outside the school in a Parker jacket after the murder. Proves nothing about before it.
Green was further questioned on her version of events that evening and the time frame she'd given police. With the use of local CCTV, police were able to establish that Mitchell had taken a completely different route home than the one she had stated, and indeed had made a stop at a local supermarket on her way home. This meant that Corinne could not have returned home until at least 5:27, 3 minutes before Shane left, and only 13 minutes before Luke would also leave. The prosecution pointed out this was in no way enough time to reflect Miss Mitchell's version of events. Corinne would also testify when Jodi did not meet Luke, he would call her at 6:40 to say that if she turned up to make her way to the college where he would be with High and Tulloch.
There's actually no other description for this particular piece than outrageous. Police CCTV footage showed she took a completely different route and went to a supermarket, and they show Tesco. Now, where Corinne came out of her work, she would have turned right, followed the road down, and then she could have taken a right, which would have taken her straight onto New Battle Road and home, or she could have continued to the bottom of the road and turned right there. Both of them take her onto New Battle Road. She forgot that she'd stopped at a little shop on the corner called Morning, Noon and Night to buy cigarettes on her way home. So not a completely different route. Both of them took her onto the New Battle Road. One just detoured by the shop. The suggestion that she went to Tesco, which is well out of the way of her route home, yes, that would have been a completely different route had she taken it. So how do we know she didn't? Police CCTV footage, what are we going to do if they've got footage of her in Tesco? They don't. The footage of her is in Morning, Noon and Night at the top of the New Battle Road at 5:05. So she would have been home by 5:15. Even stopping off for her cigarettes, she'd have been home by 5:15. But using this imagery of Tesco, the suggestion being that she went way out of her way, and the timing, she couldn't have got home till 5:27. Well, if she'd gone to Tesco, that would be true. But she didn't go to Tesco. We've got the CCTV footage of her in Morning, Noon and Night at 5:05. And then the claim that Luke called her at 6:40 to see if Jodi didn't turn up to send her over to the Abbey. Now remember, earlier it was stated that he called David High at 6:32. And then 8 minutes later, he calls his mum to say, if Jodi turns up, tell her to come and meet us at the Abbey.
Several neighbours reported two separate fires at the Mitchells' back garden that evening. The first at 6:30, just before Luke made contact with High, and the second around 10 p.m, just as neighbours witnessed Mitchell returning home.
Again, just keep these times in mind. 6:30. Remember the times of the boys on the push bikes? Somewhere between 6:20 and 6:30, still on the wall at the end of the street. And 6:32 he phones David High.
Mitchell's outlook would see him referred to a school psychologist at the age of 11 while attending Kings Park Primary in Dalkeith. This after his attitude shown during a fight with another pupil on the school grounds.
Yes, absolutely true. The fight was a result of bullying. Luke had been bullied for some time and eventually fought back. That's the attitude that they're talking about, is when he fought back.
Luke would take the unusual route of going from Kings Park Primary to St David's High instead of the usual common Dalkeith High.
Now, why do you think that would be? If those bullies were all going to go up to Dalkeith High, did it not make more sense for Luke to go to a different high school away from the bullies?
Luke's history of violence wouldn't be confined to these examples, however, with classmate Ben Sole recalling two incidents involving Mitchell. One involving Luke assaulting someone in the school canteen, and another where Luke smashed up his bike.
Okay, they refer to his history of violence. So far we have one fight in primary school as a result of bullying, and two incidents described by one witness, one of which, the assault in the canteen, was a tree that they get their food on. This guy was pushing and shoving and being obnoxious, and Luke whacked him with the tree. That was the assault. The smashing up his bike, there's nothing else to corroborate it.
The prosecution would show the Mitchell household was somewhat unorthodox. Witnesses testified to regularly smoking cannabis in the house with Luke and his mum. Although there was nothing sexual in nature between Luke and Corinne, the relationship was described as odd by some, with Luke seen as somewhat of the man of the house after the separation.
Okay, let's just throw everything we've got here to make the Mitchell family look weird. First of all, there's no evidence that these people smoked cannabis with Corinne. Secondly, although there was nothing sexual between Luke and his mother, well, why mention it? Clearly, it's intended to raise the suggestion that there might have been. And finally, The man of the house. Okay, his brother's 7 years older than him. How many 21-year-olds would be quite happy to accept their 14-year-old brother as the man of the house? Now, Luke's parents separated when he was 10 or 11. So what 17 or 18-year-old guy would be happy to have his 10 or 11-year-old brother take the place as the man of the house? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Waters would be further muddied in public perception when it came to light that Corinne was sharing a room with Luke when he was arrested. This, however, was a room with bunk beds, and it turned out it was merely Corinne being present in the room during their arrest, smoking cannabis with Luke.
Well, that's a new one. That's a new one. It was a room with bunk beds and Corinne was just present there, smoking cannabis when they got arrested. The original story about them sharing a room actually referred to them sleeping in the living room when Luke was heavily medicated and he slept on the couch in front of the window and Corinne was sleeping on the couch on the opposite wall just to keep an eye on him. So that's where the original story about them sharing a room came from. Corinne was just in his room at 7 o'clock in the morning on a work day, smoking cannabis with him. Really? Nothing in the police records that when they arrested them, Luke and Corinne were in a room smoking cannabis. In fact, Corinne was downstairs in the living room and Luke was upstairs in his bedroom when they came through the door.
The dynamic between the two would be called into question more when Corinne took the stand, as it came to light she helped Luke get an underage tattoo with the use of fake ID. Mitchell said it was due to Luke going through a hard time and needing to commemorate it, while the prosecution would argue it showed a lack of proper parental guidance, structure, and the following of the law.
Okay, let's clarify a couple of things here, shall we? It showed something about the dynamic between them. What, that Luke got a tattoo? My daughter's got tattoos. My nephews have got tattoos. What does it say about the dynamic between them and their parents, apart from nothing? Now, secondly, it's this thing about proper parental control and following the law. It is not unlawful for an underage person to have a tattoo. The crime is on the tattooist for knowingly tattooing an underage person. So let's be absolutely straight about that. It is not a crime to get a tattoo underage. It's a crime for someone to tattoo someone knowing they're underage. That's it.
After all, false ID, drug dealing, and knife possession did show regular disregard for rules.
False ID, drug dealing, and knife possession did show regular disregard for rules. Well, it's one example of false ID, so regular. But secondly, how many other people connected to this inquiry were involved with dealing drugs and carrying knives? So if a concern with following rules is an issue, then what about the others?
Jodi had commented to friend Kirsten Ford that she, quote, found it weird Luke had a lot of knives, and further commented she knew Corinne was smoking a lot of cannabis and described her as, quote, mad as a hatter.
Once again, all we have here is Kirsten Ford's word. Jodi can't corroborate what she said. And once again, this claim that Corinne was smoking a lot of cannabis is simply not borne out by the evidence.
Mitchell appeared to be very sexually active for his age. Not only was Luke in a relationship with Jodi, but he was also dating Kimberly Thompson from Kenmore in Perthshire.
Luke appeared to be very sexually active for his age. Good Lord. He was 14, going on 15, when he was asked how often he and Jodi had had sex during their relationship. He said 4 or 5. The previous relationship with Kimberly, they had a holiday romance. She did come to see him in the December to January of 2003 before he met Jodi. And that was the end of their contact. So whatever kind of relationship he was having with Kimberly after that was not sexual.
Jodi at one point believed Luke was cheating on her when confiding with best friend Kirsten Ford.
That makes me very sad. There was a point at which Jodi wondered if Luke was cheating on her. Not with Kimberly, with somebody else. And you know what made her wonder about that? Her mum suggested it. There was another very good friend, female friend, that they went about with all the time. And her mum suggested that maybe Luke had something going with a friend as well. Jodi approached both of them. They were both absolutely horrified and reassured her that that was absolutely not the case.
Mitchell's claims about his drugs habit would be questioned, with Luke claiming to smoke 40 joints a day, or 300 a week. Detective Constable Brian Melrose stated he hadn't heard of anyone using such a...
Oh, bless Brian Melrose. Never heard of anybody using that amount of cannabis. Did they have a look at anybody else's cannabis use or possession? Given how much cannabis we now know was swilling about at the time. Also, the claim that Luke said it was 40 joints or 300 joints or whatever it was. The interrogation in the August, the police are screaming at him, yeah, you're saying you didn't deal and you didn't have much cannabis. We've got people telling us you're an out-and-out hash head, an out-and-out dope head. Who is it that claimed the 40 joints, the 300 joints a week?
With Mitchell going on to state this amount would double after Jodi's death. Melrose stated, quote, even as an adult, it would be difficult to function on that amount.
I shouldn't laugh, but I figured out the timings here. In a 14-hour day, 14 hours a week, Luke would have had to be smoking a joint every 10 waking minutes, from when he opened his eyes in the morning till he went to bed at night. And that includes rolling the joints and actually smoking them. 10 minutes. And our police officer Melrose says it would be difficult to function. I would think so. He was articulate, coherent, able to answer all the questions in 2 police interrogations. So the 4th of July and the 14th of August. But apparently would have been virtually unable to function on the amount of cannabis, the claim he was smoking. And then they tried to say that it was to cover up the fact that he was dealing. Oh, how very convenient.
Luke's behaviour was also questioned in relation to meeting up with his friends after Jodi had failed to meet him. Luke had called Hi a second time and instructed him to meet him at the college instead of his house.
What time? What time did he call Hi to instruct him to meet at the college instead of his house? Has to have been between 6:32 and 6:40 when he phoned his mum and said if Jodi arrives, tell her to come to the Abbey. Give us a time. Where is the time of the second call?
It would also be highlighted during proceedings that Luke had made a call to Jodi's house before speaking to Alan Ovens, but had terminated that call before it connected, this at 17:32. The prosecution would argue that if Luke had spoken to anyone in the house at that time, he risked them hearing Ferris and Dickie on the moped, and therefore placing himself at the East House's end of the path.
Well, that's a new one. I've never heard that one before. First of all, the call didn't connect. You can't say Luke terminated it. It just didn't connect. The claim that it was because he was worried that somebody might hear the moped in the background and that would give away his whereabouts. According to Ferris and Dickie, according to this documentary itself, Ferris and Dickie weren't on the path at 5:32. They said 5 o'clock till 5:15. Uh-oh. That explanation doesn't work, does it?
Furthermore, the call he did finally make would come nearly 10 minutes later, plenty time to hurry along Ronsdyke Path and out of earshot to be spotted hiding from roadside view.
It just gets better. So he actually had 8 minutes, not 10 minutes, between the 2 calls. So he's tried to call, and their suggestion is he's still on Roansdyke Path. So he's at the scene of the murder. Why would he be calling our house from the scene of the murder if he was the murderer? And then he scootles along Roansdyke Path to be out of earshot of the bike that's not there. But if it had been, the point where Fleming and Walsh saw him is just diagonally across the road from the New Battle end of the path. So he's hardly out of earshot. And finally, hiding. How was he hiding? He was standing on the main... This person was standing in full view on the main road. And if it's Luke they're talking about, he was sitting in full view on the main road by 6 o'clock. How was he hiding?
The court heard from David High that on the evening of Jodi's death, Luke was not as unkempt as he normally would be in their company, seeming somewhat cleaner than usual. The prosecution would argue this is because after calling High, Mitchell returned home to cover up any potential evidence. This would also be the reason Luke wanted to meet out with the house, and would also line up with the time that Mitchell's first garden fire was witnessed by neighbour Patricia Franklin at 6:30 p.m.
So let's see if that does tie up with the timings. So we've got Luke in full view, apparently, at 10 to 6, between 5 to 6 and 6 o'clock, 5 past 6, and between 20 past 6 and half past 6. All on the New Battle Road, all in full view. The claim then is that he called David High at 6:32 and then went home to destroy evidence. And his mum's already started the fire by now. After he's been out in full view the whole time. Then he goes home to destroy evidence. But we also have this call at 6:40 to his mum to say if Jodi turns up, send her over to the Abbey. So he's home, cleaned up and back out again in less than 8 minutes, is what you'd have to believe for this to fit.
Mitchell had claimed he didn't really know the area where Jodi was found that well. This seemed somewhat odd, as not only was there a tree that seemed to have both his and Jodi's initials carved into it, but Luke had drawn a detailed map during a conversation with Mitchell's police liaison officer.
And again, presentation being everything here. The tree with the initials carved on it was at the other end, beside the big opening, where all the kids used to go in there and sit and smoke and be naughty boys and girls. Nowhere near the actual murder scene. The detailed map. The family liaison officer asked Luke to sketch where he'd been, where he thought he'd gone over the wall and all of that. So his claim that he didn't know that area particularly well was clearly before he'd been there, he didn't know it. And she's asking him to draw a sketch afterwards of where he thought he went over the wall. So once again, it's this take a nugget of truth and then embed it in a completely false narrative, or certainly a misleading narrative.
The liaison officer would also intercept the replacement jacket and knife's receipt after staff members of Flip had alerted them about the purchase.
Oh, here's our psychic police officers again. So the liaison officer would intercept a receipt. A receipt for a jacket that was bought that day, I think it was the 7th of July, and a receipt for a knife that wasn't bought until December. But let's look at something else here. Why were staff from Flip alerting the police to a mother buying clothes for her teenage son? Why would they do that? They must have hundreds of people going through the shop buying clothes. Why would they alert the police?
Finlay would use a lot of his time instead to argue his client had been treated unfairly, on one occasion spending hours showing news pieces about the case, only to be questioned as to his point by the judge himself.
What a monster. Imagine arguing that your 14-year-old client had been unfairly treated by a howling media that had hounded him for nearly 19 months. What was Mr. Finlay thinking of? They make it out like, oh, the judge even questioned what's the point. The point is obvious to any thinking person. Trial by media of a child.
But even on the night of Jodi's death, Sister Janine Jones testified that, quote, the only time Luke showed any emotion was when he was on the phone to the police and we were shouting at him. He then started to raise his voice.
Well, that was her testimony. It's not what she said in her statements. It was her testimony at trial. But how interesting that her perception of someone showing emotion is that they raise their voice. And that's all she's got. He only started to raise his voice after we were shouting at him. That's his show of emotion, is it? No other way of showing emotion other than raising his voice.
Jodi regarded you with affection and trust. She went out joyfully to meet you, and she did you no harm. Yet you inflicted a horrible death on her and mutilated her body.
Affection and trust. So, not suspecting him of anything then. Went out joyfully to meet him. So, not setting out to confront him about another girl. She'd said in her diary she would have been devastated if she and Luke had split up. So, set out joyfully. She's not devastated. She's not setting out to confront him about another girl.
Mitchell has appealed on several points, claiming a lookalike was guilty of Jodi's murder.
Naughty. Absolutely not true. The claim in the SCCRC application was that the identification by Fleming and Walsh, the New Battle Road, could have been a mistaken identity. In no way was it suggesting that Mark Cain was guilty. It was simply saying it could have been Mark Cain they saw on that road and not Luke.
Further suspects would come to light since Mitchell's conviction, although both would be eliminated from any further inquiries by police due to a lack of evidence.
How did that lack of evidence come about? The police just decided not to investigate further. That's the lack of evidence.
James Falkner's sperm was found in a condom some distance from Jodi's body. Falkner had been in the wooded area another time masturbating.
Some distance from Jodi's body. What distance from Jodi's body? Big distance? Little distance? Initially 20 yards. And he'd been there masturbating another time. No, the night of the murder.
Death. Another, a local drug addict, was also cleared of any involvement. Mark Cain was highlighted by college mate Scott Forbes after Cain had met him, with scratches on his face and little memory of the day of Jodi's death. Forbes would later go on to write a book about the case.
So just to make it absolutely clear, neither was cleared of anything. They simply were not investigated. Different thing. As for Scott writing the book, he brought Mark Cain to the attention of police the first week after Jodi's murder, within the first week. So 2003. He wrote a book in 2022. So it's not like he brought him to police attention and then wrote a book about it. So that's the end of my little look through this particular video, this particular claim to be factual. I will leave it up to you to decide whether you think it's a great timeline or sticks to the facts. Just keeping the record straight.